Charlotte Bruus Christensen, you're the cinematographer for the mystery series A Murder at the End of the World. Now, the story is told in two different time periods in very different locales. How much did you actually shoot on location and how much was on set?
Um, there was a lot of, I don't know if I want to say 50-50, but close. A lot was on the studio in New Jersey, but obviously all the exteriors, Iceland and the New Jersey part and Utah was all obviously on location. But it felt a lot longer on stage than it did when it did on location, just because we did have, the massive set was the hotel, and then I think we had about 12, 13, 14 other sets on the stages. So we sort of moving around at the stages a lot, and we could only fit in half the hotel in on stage. So we had to mirror that circle, so go out and do other things and come back to the stage. So it was sort of back and forth, but yeah, pretty much 50-50, maybe a little bit more on stage, let's say.
And how challenging was that? That having that half built set and then sort of mirroring it for the other half of the facility to shoot that.
It was a challenge. It was first and foremost because just the shooting order, when you have to sort of figure out, okay, well, we're gonna record Darby running one way, and then we have to pick up in 3 months' time when she continues, down the other side of the hotel. So practically there was a lot of things to consider, but also, obviously pre-production were more about how do we do this. The set was packed into that stage. It was a big stage, but just getting enough room to light it and enough room to build platforms where we could get snow in, so we could get all the transitions when Darby leaves her room and jumps over the railing and runs into the snow. There was a lot of sort of transition scenes that we needed to sort of set up on stage and then pick them up in Iceland. So there was a lot of things to consider, and it made it more difficult that we didn't have the entire interior set of the hotel, and also just because rooms, one of the big main locations in that hotel was the dining room, and then when we mirrored it, it became the library. So but lighting wise, we sort of had to keep the same theory, to not sort of make too much of a change in the middle of shooting. So a lot of considerations, but it worked, I think.
And in those location exterior scenes, were you dealing a lot with the elements? Like, were there a lot of challenges with that?
Yeah, I mean, Iceland was obviously very challenging because of the weather, and actually our director got hit by hypothermia on the very first day. So it was a massive challenge to shoot in that environment. And also COVID was an issue because Iceland actually took up their masks the day we landed, and we couldn't, and so we got hit by a crazy sort of COVID hit. So there was a lot of challenges with the exteriors, but yeah, the cold, and then Utah, the heat was obviously was crazy.
Now, with these two different time periods, did you approach them differently so you could set them apart visually, when you're cutting back and forth between them?
Yeah, there was this idea of the white desert and the golden warm desert, and the real world being those two deserts, and our world versus cyber world. So there was constantly this sort of contrast of something, and when you have these ideas of the white and the warm, and there's always a thing of sort of not overdoing it, because it is like that in itself. So I think we try to trust that it was already just in choice of locations and in the writing, Iceland versus Utah, the past. So I think we spoke a lot about it, and we were very aware of there must be a change, it must feel different, the past to the present. But it was truthfully in the locations. And so I think we very much we didn't force those ideas to sort of be more than what they were in real life. I think we constantly sort of wanted to stay very true to reality and make it sort of a truthful and not too forced in the look of things. But we constantly thought about this real world and cyber world, and the story is about this young girl's a child of the internet, and how she can navigate effortlessly in cyber world. But in real world, it's not effortlessly. It's constantly with a struggle just to be human. So a lot of it was written, and we just had to sort of constantly trust that it was in the writing. And I think we said that very often, as even though we sort of want to enhance everything and I want to do things with a cinematographer, we also sort of ended a lot of those discussions saying, but it's there, we have to trust.
And with the cyber world elements, you have a lot of technology and a lot of, some effects that go into creating what this futuristic world looks like. How did you incorporate those into your photography?
Again, a lot of it was in the writing, and a lot of it was, on the screen. So just photographing that screen was a big thing. And we had a second unit to sort of create the imagery within the screen, because it's a big part of the story. So we needed it to be very precise, and it couldn't just be sort of oh, those close-ups, we'll do it at the end of the day, we'll have 5 minutes to do it. It had to have proper time to focus on parts of the screen. And it's because also people have to sort of navigate and understand the way she thinks, so she chooses this. And so it's sort of within that square screen, there was a lot of different shots. So it was very planned, and we was very serious about getting it right. And then we had a whole other team that was sort of working with the design of that, because obviously that had a big part of the look of the film, because there is so much on that screen. So there was constantly sort of development of the look of Andy Ronson's site and his image and all these things. So it was a close collaboration with a lot of different people to sort of develop the look. But for me, it still was sort of broken down into shots. And whereas, the other teams were creating the look of it, so the design of it.
And did you draw inspiration from other films or mysteries or filmmakers in terms of developing the visual style for this?
Yeah, we did talk a lot about a lot of European movies from the 80s and 90s. I think there was something about holding on to this sort of analog feel. It would have been great to shoot on film. All these things that sort of helps you think analog. And I think we were very much inspired by Kieslowski's movies, just because you sort of sense that he gets an idea and then he shoots that idea. It's sort of a one-to-one. It doesn't go through, computers and VFX and all these other sort of stages to get a final image. It's sort of it's a very simple idea, and we really wanted the simplicity, and that sort of, you get an idea and you tell that story alongside, what we just spoke about, the whole cyber world and the design of it, and our teams that were sort of developing the look of that, and us that were developing how to shoot it. And so we needed sort of that contrast again to sort of keep the storytelling very old-fashioned, very simple, very truthful to cinema, and then to also again work sort of constantly having the contrast of the other world, the cyber world. So everything was very sort of like the two sides of things. And so the actual filmmaking, we so often spoke about, let's keep it real, and European cinema, was an inspiration for that.
And you've talked about embracing imperfection and sort of happy accidents while making the series. Along with that analog feel. What were some places where you feel like that approach benefited the show?
I want to say it's not just an excuse. Often, happy mistakes. Well, it happened very often, I think. What can I think of? Iceland is a place that you can't control. We tried, and I think that's the nature of filmmakers, is we want to control everything, and the weather, and so we got there, and there were definitely scenes and weather conditions that were like, okay, this is not what it was supposed to be, but let's shoot. And it turned out, that the feeling of whatever happened was much better than what we had planned. So especially this thing of like, go with the weather and go, and let's just shoot, let's see what we get, was definitely one. But I think also just smaller situations, in small scenes in Darby's room, I think we often sort of was, let's see what happens. Like, let's not try and constantly correct things and make it perfect in the frame. It was little things like that. Also, it's like, well, that's what she did, and that glass fell over, and so let's go with. So I think it was sort of like an everyday thing of, let's not fix everything, the imperfection, and if something happens, let's see if we can stay with it and see if it sort of gives us a feel throughout the show. I think that the real world side of things needed to be imperfect, and the cyber world is man-made and created, and we want to make things perfect. Though it turns out at the very end that cyber world isn't perfect. But I think throughout the show, it was important that you sort of feel that difference, without us filmmakers sort of, making it too much of a thing constantly.
And you're working with Britt Marling and Zal Batmanglij on the show. They're showrunners, writers, directors. What was that collaboration like with those two? They're such creative forces on the show.
It was a real joy. It sounds like a very simple word, but I think I learned a lot from just their energy. And from this sort of constantly rethinking and changing things. And cinematographers don't like to sort of constantly change things. You're like, well, this is what we planned. But they sort of grabbed me, and sort of, I actually got to really understand that way of, if we want to make this, it's a massive 7-hour piece. And they're very passionate about the story. They've written something so amazing that I loved and trusted. I had to jump on that wagon of just like, well, if that doesn't work, we're going to change it, then we're going to shoot it anyway and do it this way. And so those sort of constantly evaluating and adapting and trusting the story. So if we can't have it the way we want it, there's something else, talking about sort of not mistakes, but like, okay, well, the perfect is maybe not perfect for this. And so I think they taught me a lot, and their relationship, I mean, just meeting them, immediately that what they have, you got to be part of protecting that. Don't ever try and sort of figure out one and hold it up against the other. And it's like, they're so strong in who they are and how they collaborate, that I almost sort of think of them as one, because their friendship and their professional working relationship is so strong that, you don't have time to sort of try and understand the 20 years that made that. So for me, it was like, they're so different, and yet their understanding of things are so in line. So it was really interesting to sort of see them as one unit, and then yet you had two very different personalities. And also because the way they worked was Brit directed, some episodes, and Zol the others, and they were very respectful to each other. So I also had to work just with the one and then the other one. But it's interesting when I think about it that it was so easy. Actually, it sounds crazy, and it was, but also because of their respect to each other, it made it a joy for me. Things were tough, and it was a lot to achieve. The 7 hours, and it's a very ambitious piece, and we wanted to look like the most expensive feature film and all these things. Obviously we put a lot of pressure on ourselves, but it was challenging, but overall my word would really be that I've learned a lot, and they've become dear friends. So I think that says everything.
Well, I want to congratulate you on your work on the show, and thank you so much for talking with me today. It's been a pleasure.
You're so welcome. It was a pleasure. Thank you.